is a live reading of the Left Behind series books. We are on the third book, Nicolae, and I will begin to read chapter 3. Call it a hunch, Rayford, but I put something in here just for you. Rayford and Earl were finished in the cockpit. He trusted Earl. He knew that if Earl thought he could fly this thing, then he could. He still was going to insist on his and his temporary first officers taking off, staging, and landing before he risked flying anyone else. It wouldn't have bothered Rayford to crash and kill himself along with the Antichrist, but he didn't want to be responsible for innocent lives, particularly that of his own wife. So what did you do for me, Earl? Just look at this, Earl said. He pointed to the button that allowed the captain to speak to the passengers. Captain's intercom, Rayford said. So what? Reach under your seat with your left hand and run your fingers along the side edge of the bottom of your chair, Earl said. I feel a button. I'm going to step back into the cabin now, Earl said. You mash the normal intercom button and make an announcement. Wait for a count of 3 and then push that button under your seat. Make sure your headphones are still on. Rayford waited until Halliday had left and latched the cockpit door. Rayford got on the intercom. Hello, hello, hey, Earl, yada, yada, yada. Rayford counted silently to himself, then pushed the button under his seat. He was amazed to hear through his earphones Earl Halliday speaking in just about a whisper. Rayford, you can tell I'm speaking in lower than even conversational tones. If I did my job right, you can hear me plain as day from all over this plane. Every one of the speakers is also a transmitter and leads back to only your headphone jack. I wired it in such a way that it's undetectable. And this plane has been gone over by Global Community's best bug finders. If it's ever detected, I'll just tell them I thought that was what they wanted. Rayford came hustling out of the cockpit. Earl, you're a genius. I'm not sure what I'll hear, but it has to be an advantage to know what's going on out here. Buck was boxing up all the pages from Bruce's printout when he heard the Range Rover in the parking lot. By the time Chloe reached the office, he had packaged pages and Bruce's computer into one big carton. As he lugged it out, he told Chloe, drop me off at the Chicago Bureau office and then you'd better check with the Drake and be sure our stuff is still there. We want to keep that room until we find a place to live closer to here. I was hoping you'd say that, Chloe said. Loretta is devastated. She's going to need a lot of help here. What are we going to do about a funeral? You're going to have to help handle that, Chloe. You'll want to check with the coroner's office, have the body delivered to a funeral home nearby here, and all that. With so many casualties, it's going to be a mess, so they'll probably be glad to know that at least one body has been claimed. We're each going to need a vehicle. I have no idea where I'll be expected to go. I can work out of Chicago's office in light of the fact that no one will be going to New York for a long time, but I can't promise I'll be around here all the time. Loretta, bless her heart, thought of the same thing in spite of all she's going through. She reminded me that there's a fleet of extra cars among the congregation and has been ever since the rapture. They lend these out for just such crises as this one. Good, Buck said. Let's get you fixed up with one of those, and remember, we're going to need to get this material reproduced for members of the congregation. You're not going to have time to go through all that, are you, Buck? No, but I'm confident that anything in here will be profitable for all. Buck, wait a minute. There's no way we can reproduce that until someone has read all of it. There's got to be private personal stuff in there. And you know there will be direct references to Carpathia and to Tribulation Force. We can't risk being exposed like that. Buck had an ego crisis. He loved this woman, but she was 10 years his junior, and he hated when it seemed as if she was telling him what to do, especially when she was right. As he laid the heavy boxes of pages and the computer in the back of the Range Rover, Chloe said, "Just entrust it to me, hon. I'll spend every day between now and Sunday poring over it line by line. By then, we'll have something to share with the rest of New Hope, and we can even announce that we might have something in copied form for them within a week or so." "When you're right, you're right. But where will you do this?" "Loretta has offered to let us stay with her. She's got that big old house, you know." "That would be perfect, but I hate to impose." "Buck, we would hardly be imposing. She'll hardly know we're there. Anyway, I sense she's so lonely and beside herself with grief that she really needs us." "You know, it's unlikely I'll be there much," Buck said. "I'm a big girl. I can take care of myself." They were in the Range Rover now. "Then what do you need me for?" Buck said. "I keep you around because you're cute. But seriously, Chloe, I'll never forgive myself if I'm in some other city or country and the war comes right here to Mount Prospect." "You've forgotten the shelter under the church." "I haven't forgotten it, Chloe. I'm just praying it'll never come to that." "Does anybody else know about the place except the Tribulation Force?" "No, not even Loretta. It's an awfully small place. If Daddy and Amanda and you and I had to stay there for any length of time, it wouldn't be much fun." Half an hour later, Buck pulled into the Chicago area office of Global Community Weekly magazine. "I'm going to get us a couple of satellite phones," Chloe said. "I'll call the Drake and then get down there and get our stuff. I'll also talk with Loretta about a second vehicle." "Get 5 of those phones, Chloe, and don't scrimp." "5," she said. "I don't even know if Loretta would even know how to use one." "I'm not thinking of Loretta. I just want to make sure we have a spare." The Condor 216 was outfitted even more lavishly than Global Community 1 had been, if that was possible. No detail has been missed, and the latest communications devices have been installed. Rayford had bidden farewell to Earl Halliday, urging Earl to let him know that his home was intact and his wife was safe as soon as he knew. "You're not going to like what's happened to our airport," Rayford had told him. "You won't be landing at O'Hara." Rayford and his temporary co-pilot had irritated Carpathia by making a trial takeoff and fly around before letting the others board the plane. Rayford was glad he had. While it was true that everything in the cockpit was identical to the 777, the bigger, heavier plane behaved more like a 747, and it took some getting used to. Now that the loaded and airborne Condor 216 was streaking towards San Francisco at 33,000 feet and at more than 700 miles per hour, Rayford put the craft on autopilot and urged his first officer to stay alert. "What are you going to be doing, sir?" the younger man asked. "Just sitting here," Rayford said, "thinking and reading." Rayford had cleared his flight path with an Oklahoma tower and now pushed the button to communicate with his passengers. "Coachton, Carpathia, and guests. This is Captain Steele. Our estimated time of arrival in San Francisco is 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We expect clear skies and smooth flying." Rayford sat back and pulled his earphone band toward the back of his head, as if pulling the phones off. However, they were still close enough to his ears so that he could hear, and his co-pilot, because his own earphones were on, could not. Rayford pulled from his flight bag a book and opened it, resting it on the controls before him. He would have to remember to turn a page occasionally. He would not really be reading, he would be listening. He slipped his left hand under the seat and quietly depressed the hidden button. The first voice he heard, clear as if she were talking to him on the phone, was Amanda's. "Yes, sir, I understand." "You need not worry about me." "No, sir." Now Carpathia spoke. "I trust everyone got enough to eat in Dallas. We will have an entire flight crew joining us in San Francisco, and we will be well taken care of throughout our flight to Baghdad and then on to New Babylon. Another voice. Baghdad? Yes, Carpathia said. I have taken the liberty of flying into Baghdad the remaining 3 loyal ambassadors. Our enemies might have assumed we would fly them directly into New Babylon. We will pick them up and begin our meetings on the short hop from Baghdad to New Babylon. Mrs. Steele, if you would excuse us. Certainly, Amanda said. Gentlemen, Carpathia spoke more quietly now, but still clearly enough that Rayford could understand every word. Someday he would have to thank Earl Holiday on behalf of the kingdom of Christ. Earl had no interest in serving God, at least not yet, but whatever motivated him to do Rayford a favor like that, it was certainly going to benefit the enemies of the Antichrist. Carpathia was saying, Mr. Fortunato remained in Dallas briefly to arrange my next radio broadcast from there. I will do it from here. However, it will be patched to Dallas and broadcast, again to throw off any enemies of the global community. I do need him in our talks in the night, so we will wait on the ground in San Francisco until he is able to join us. As soon as we leave the ground out of San Francisco, we will trigger both LA and the Bay Area. The Bay Area, came a heavily accented voice. Yes, that is San Francisco and the Oakland area. What do you mean by trigger? Carpathia's tone became grave. Trigger means just what it sounds like it means, he said. By the time we land in Baghdad, more than Washington, New York, and Chicago will have been decimated. Those are just 3 of the North American cities that will suffer the most. So far, only the airport and 1 suburb have suffered in Chicago. That will change within the hour. You already know about London. Do you gentlemen understand the significance of a 100 megaton bomb? There was silence. Carpathia continued. To put it in perspective, history books tell us that a 20 megaton bomb carries more power than all those dropped in World War II, including the 2 that fell on Japan. The United States of Great Britain had to be taught, came the accented voice again. Indeed they did, Carpathia said. And in North America alone, Montreal, Toronto, Mexico City, Dallas, Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles will become object lessons to those who would oppose us. Rayford whipped off his earphones and unbuckled himself. He stepped through the cockpit door and made eye contact with Amanda. He motioned for her to come to him. Carpathia looked up and smiled. Captain Steele, he greeted him. Is everything well? Our flight is uneventful, sir, if that's what you're asking. That's the best kind of flight. I can't say much for what's happening on the ground, however. True enough, Carpathia said, suddenly sober. I will soon address the global community with my condolences. Rayford pulled Amanda into the galleyway. Were Buck and Chloe going to stay at the Drake again tonight? There wasn't time to talk about it, Ray, she said. I can't imagine what other choice they'd have. It sounds like they may never get back to New York. I'm afraid Chicago is a certain someone's next target, Rayford said. Oh, I can't imagine, Amanda said. I have to warn them. Do you want to risk a phone call that could be traced? She asked. Saving their lives would be worth any risk. Amanda embraced him and went back to her seat. Rayford used his own cell phone after making sure his first officer was otherwise engaged. No answer. Reaching the Drake Hotel in Chicago, Rayford asked for the Williamses. We have 3 guests named Williams, he was told, none with the first name of Cameron or Buck or Chloe. Rayford racked his brain. Just put me through to Mr. Katz then, he said. Herbert Katz, the operator said. That's the one. After a minute, no answer. Sir, would you like to leave a message on their voicemail? I would, Rayford said, but I would also like to be sure that the message light is lit and that they are flagged down for an urgent message should they visit the front desk. We'll certainly do that, sir. Thank you for calling the Drake. When the voicemail tone came on, Rayford spoke quickly. Kids, you know who this is. Don't take the time to do anything. Get as far away from downtown Chicago as you can. Please trust me on this. Buck had had innumerable run-ins with Verna Z in the Chicago office. Once he felt she had overstepped her bounds and had moved too quickly into her former boss's office after Lucinda Washington disappeared in the rapture. Then, when Buck himself was demoted for ostensibly missing the most important assignment of his life, Verna did become Chicago bureau chief and lorded it over him. Now that he was a publisher, he had been tempted to fire her, but he had let her remain, provided she did the job and kept her nose clean. Even feisty Verna seemed shell-shocked when Buck swept into the office late that afternoon. As usual in times of international crisis, the staff was huddled around the TV. A couple of employees looked up when Buck came in. "What do you think of this, Chief?" one said, and several others noticed him. Verna Z made a beeline for Buck. "You have several urgent messages," she said. "Carpathia himself has been trying to reach you all day. There's also an urgent message from a Rayford Steele." Now there was a choice for all time. Whom should Buck call? He could only guess what spin Carpathia wanted to put on World War III. He had no idea what Rayford might want. Did Mr. Steele leave a number? "You're returning his call first?" "Excuse me," he said. "I believe I asked you a question." His message was simply that you should call your hotel room. "Call my hotel room." "I would have done it for you myself, boss, but I didn't know where you were staying." "Where are you staying?" "None of your business, Verna." "Well, pardon me," she said, and marched away, which was Buck's hope. "I'll be borrowing your office temporarily," Buck called after her. She stopped and spun around. "For how long?" "For as long as I need it," he said. She scowled. Buck rushed in and shut the door. He dialed the Drake and asked for his own room. Hearing the fear in Rayford's voice, not to mention the message itself, made the color drain from his face. Buck called information for the number of the Land Rover dealership in Arlington Heights. He asked for the sales manager and said it was an emergency. Within a minute, the man was on the line. As soon as Buck identified himself, the man said, "Everything all right with the car is fine, sir, but I need to reach my wife, and she's driving it right now. I need the phone number on the built-in phone." "That would take a little digging. I could tell you how urgent this is, sir. Let me just say that it's worth my developing a quick case of buyer's remorse and returning the vehicle if I can't get that number right now." "One moment." A couple of minutes later, Buck dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "The mobile customer you have dialed is either away from the vehicle or out of the calling zone. Please try your call." Buck slammed down the phone, picked it up, and hit the redial button. While listening to the ring, he was startled when the door burst open and Verna Z mouthed, "Carpathia on the line for you." "I'm going to have to call him back," Buck said. "You're what?" "Take a number. Dial 1-800-FIRED," she said. Well, Rayford was frantic. He forgot any pretense of doing anything but sitting there, and he stared straight ahead into the late afternoon sky, earphones firmly engaged and his left hand pressing the hidden button hard. He heard Carpathia's aide. "Well, of all the—" "What?" Carpathia said. "I'm trying to get this Williams character on the line for you, and he's told his girl there to take a number." It was all Rayford could do to keep from calling Buck again himself, knowing for sure now that he was at the Chicago office. But if someone told Carpathia Buck couldn't talk to him because he was on with Rayford Steele, that would be disastrous. He heard Carpathia's reassuring voice again. "Just give him the number, my friend. I trust this young man. He is a brilliant journalist, and would not keep me waiting without good reason. Of course, he is trying to cover the story of a lifetime. Would you not agree?" Buck ordered Verna Z to shut the door on her way out and to leave him alone until he was off the phone. She sighed heavily and shook her head, slamming the door. Buck continued to hit the redial button, hating the sound of that recorded announcement more than anything he had ever heard in his life. Suddenly, the intercom came alive. I'm sorry to bother you, Verna said in a sickly sweet sing-song voice, but you have yet another urgent phone call. Chaim Rosenzweig from Israel. Buck punched the intercom button. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call him back too. Tell him I'm very sorry. You should tell me you're very sorry, Verna said. I'm tempted to patch him through anyway. I'm very sorry, Verna, Buck said with sarcasm. Now leave me alone, please. The cell phone kept ringing. Buck hung up on the recorded message several times. Verna punched back in. Dr. Rosenzweig says it's a matter of life and death, Cameron. Buck quickly punched into the blinking line. Chaim, I'm very sorry, but I'm in the middle of an urgent matter here myself. Can't I call you back? Cameron, please don't hang up on me. Israel has been spared the terrible bombings that your country has suffered. But Rabbi Ben Judah's family was abducted and slaughtered. His house is burned to the ground. I pray he is safe, but no one knows where he is. Buck was speechless. He hung his head. His family is gone. Are you sure? It was a public spectacle, Cameron. I was afraid it would come sooner or later. Why, oh, why did he have to go public with his views about Messiah? It's one thing to disagree with him, as I do, a respected and trusted friend, but the religious in this country hate a person who believes that Jesus is Messiah. Cameron, he needs our help. What can we do? I have not been able to get through to Nicolae. Chaim, do me one huge favor and leave Nicolae out of this, please. Cameron, Nicolae is the most powerful man in the world, and he has pledged to help me and to help Israel and to protect us. Surely he will step in and preserve the life of a friend of mine. Chaim, I'm begging you to trust me on this. Leave Nicolae out of it. Now I must call you back. I have family members in trouble myself. Forgive me, Cameron. Get back to me as soon as you can. Buck punched in on his original line and hit redial again. As the number sounded in his ear, Verna came to the intercom. Someone's on the line for you, but since you don't want to be bothered, Chloe's cell phone was busy. Buck slammed the phone down and punched it on the intercom. Who is it? I thought you didn't want to be bothered. Verna, I have no time for this. If you must know, it was your wife. Which line? Line 2, but I told her you were probably on the phone with Carpathia or Rosenzweig. Where was she calling from? I don't know. She said she would wait for your call. Did she leave a number? Yes, it's. When Buck heard the first two numbers, he knew it was a cell phone. He turned off the intercom and hit the redial button. Verna poked her head in the door and said, I'm not a secretary, you know, and I'm certainly not your secretary. Buck had never been angrier with anyone. He stared at Verna. I'm coming across this desk to kick that door shut. You had better not be in the way. The cell phone was ringing. Verna still stood there. Buck rose from his chair, phone still into his ear, and stepped up onto the desk and across Verna's mess of papers. Her eyes grew wide as he lifted his leg, and she ducked out of the way as he kicked the door shut with all his might. It sounded like a bomb and nearly toppled the wall partitions. Verna screamed. Buck almost wished she'd been in the doorway. Buck, came Chloe's voice from the phone. Chloe, where are you? I'm on my way out of Chicago, she said. I got the phones and went to the Drake, but there was a message for me at the desk. I know. Buck, something in Daddy's voice made me not even take the time to get anything from our room. Good. But your laptop and all your clothes and all your toiletries and everything I bought from New York. But your dad sounded serious, didn't he? Yes. Oh, Buck, I'm being pulled over by the police. I made a U-turn and I was speeding and I went through a light and I was even on the sidewalk for a while. Chloe, listen. You know the old saying about how it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission? You want me to try to outrun him? You'll probably be saving his life. There's only one reason your father would want us out of Chicago as far and as fast as possible. Okay, Buck, pray for me. Here goes nothing. I'll stay on the line with you, Chloe. I need both hands to drive. Hit the speaker button and hang that phone up, Buck said. But then he heard an explosion, tires squealing, a scream, and silence. Within seconds, the electricity went off in the Global Community Weekly office. Buck felt his way out into the hall where battery-operated emergency lights near the ceiling illuminated the doors. Look at that, someone shouted, and the staff pushed its way through the front doors and began climbing atop their own cars to watch a huge aerial attack on the city of Chicago. Rayford clandestinely listened in horror as Carpathia announced to his compatriots, Chicago should be under retaliatory attack even as we speak. Thank you for your part in this and for the strategic non-use of radioactive fallout. I have many loyal employees in that area, and though I expect to lose some in the initial attack, I need not lose any to radiation to make my point. Someone else spoke up. Shall we watch the news? Good idea, Carpathia said. Rayford could remain seated no longer. He didn't know what he would say or do, if anything, but he simply could not stay in that cockpit, not knowing whether his loved ones were safe. He entered the cabin as a television was coming on, showing the first images from Chicago. Amanda gasped. Rayford went and sat with her to watch. Would you go to Chicago for me? Rayford whispered. If you think I would be safe. There's no radiation. How do you know that? I'll tell you later. Just tell me you'll go if I can get permission from Carpathia to have you fly out of San Francisco. I'll do anything for you, Rayford. You know that. Listen to me, sweetheart. If you can't get an immediate flight, and I mean before this plane leaves the ground again, you must reboard the Condor. Do you understand? I understand, but why? I can't tell you now. Just an immediate flight to Milwaukee if I can get it cleared. If the plane is not airborne before we are. What? Just be sure, Amanda. I couldn't bear losing you. Following the news from Chicago, the cable news channel broke for a commercial, and Rayford approached Carpathia. Sir, may I have a moment? Certainly, Captain. Awful news out of Chicago, is it not? Yes, sir, it is. In fact, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You know I have family in that area. Yes, and I hope they are all safe, Carpathia said. Rayford wanted to kill him where he sat. He knew full well the man was the Antichrist, and he also knew that this very person would be assassinated one day and be resurrected from the dead by Satan himself. Rayford had never dreamed he might be an agent in that assassination, but at that instant, he would have applied for the job. He fought for composure. Whoever killed this man would be merely a pawn in a huge cosmic game. The assassination and resurrection would only make Carpathia more powerful and satanic than ever. Sir, Rayford continued, I was wondering if it would be possible for my wife to deplane in San Francisco and head back to Chicago to check on my people. I would be happy to have my staff check on them, Carpathia said, if you will simply give me their addresses. I would really feel a lot better if she could be there with them to help us needed. As you wish, Carpathia said, and it was all Rayford could do not to breathe a huge sigh of relief in the man's face. Who's got a cell phone I can borrow? Buck shouted over the din in the parking lot of Global Community Weekly. A woman next to him thrust one into his hands, and he was shocked to realize she was Verna Z. I need to make some long-distance calls, he said quickly. Can I skip all the codes and just pay you back? Don't worry about it, Cameron. Our little feud just got insignificant. I need to borrow a car, Buck shouted, but it quickly became clear that everyone was heading to their own places to check on loved ones and assess the damage. How about a ride to Mount Prospect? I'll take you, Verna muttered. I don't even want to see what's happening in other direction. You live in the city, don't you? Buck said. I did until about 5 minutes ago, Verna said. Maybe you got lucky. Cameron, if that big blast was nuclear, none of us will last a week. I might know a place you can stay in Mount Prospect, Buck said. I'd be grateful, she said. Verna went back inside to gather up her stuff. Buck waited in his car, making his phone calls. He started with his own father out west. I'm so glad you called, his father said. I tried calling New York for hours. Dad, it's a mess here. I'm left with the clothes on my back, and I don't have much time to talk. I just called to make sure everybody was all right. Your brother and I are doing all right, Buck's dad said. He's still grieving the loss of his family, of course, but we're all right. Dad, the wheels are coming off of this country. You're not going to really be all right until... Cameron, let's not get into this again, okay? I know what you believe, and if it gives you comfort... Dad, it gives me little comfort right now. It kills me that I was so late coming to the truth. I've already lost too many loved ones. I don't want to lose you too. His father chuckled. Maddening, Buck. You're not going to lose me, big boy. Nobody seems to want to even attack us out here. We feel a little neglected. Dad, millions are dying. Don't be glib about this. So, how's the new wife of yours? Are we ever going to get to meet her? I don't know, Dad. I don't know exactly where she is right now, and I don't know whether you'll ever get the chance to meet her. You ashamed of your own father? It's not that at all, Dad. I need to make sure she's all right, and we're going to have to try to get out that way somehow. Find a good church there, Dad. Find somebody who can explain to you what's going on. I can't think of anybody more qualified than you, Cameron, and you're just going to have to let me ruminate on this myself. And that is the end of chapter 3. We will be reading chapter 4 next, and I thank you for joining me and have a great day.